I think everyone's heard of this moral framework that says hard times create strong men create good times create weak men, and weak men then create hard times. And then we go back to the beginning and the whole cycle repeats itself, meaning that history tends to have a cyclical nature in a moral sense. I think everyone's familiar with that concept. However, I think there's another cycle going on here that we can almost overlay on top of this and that fits this exact pattern. And it's in regard to beliefs. Beliefs follows a cyclical nature. Now, I have to say, I'm still working on this, so this might be a bit more waffly than what I'd like it to be. But it goes something like this. Hard times produce rational belief. Rational belief produces good times. Good times produce luxury beliefs. Luxury beliefs produce hard times. Let's walk through this, and I'll try to explain what I mean, and I'll try to make it not too waffly. Hopefully this will make sense. So first of all, civilizations tend to begin in hard times. Think back to the beginnings of any civilization and you will find pioneers and settlers who pushed into new and wild frontiers and who therefore faced the world in its most elemental form. Whether it be the first Celtic tribes here in Scotland, or the first people to settle the harsh northern parts of Scandinavia, or even the first settlers of the American Wild West, it is in the nature of being a pioneer and a settler that you face hardship because you are confronting the world in its most elemental form. In the beginning, life is raw and wild, and every day is a constant struggle for survival. Now, these conditions create a certain mindset. They force a certain mindset. It's a practical mindset. It's a rational mindset. It's a realistic mindset. Essentially, you wake up every day thinking, what do we need to do here in order to firstly survive in this place, but then ultimately flourish and multiply and grow strong in this place? So you think, well, we have to build shelters first of all and source food. So we need to fashion hunting implements and we need to go out there to fish and we need to make the earth around us productive and we need to source water and find fuel for energy, whether that be wood or peat or whatever it is. And you're constantly driven by sheer necessity every single day, doing what you must in order to survive. And really what you're doing here is you're constantly asking the question, how does this world actually work? Actually, can I eat this thing? Can I drink that? If we build differently, does it make the shelter stronger? If we use this different material, does it make the building last longer? You're constantly trying to figure out what the reality of this world actually is so you can adapt to that reality, the laws of nature, laws of physics, biology, chemistry, so you can work with it for your survival, first of all, and then your ultimate flourishing. Now, one reality that you have to adapt for survival and flourishing is natural gender roles in this early time. Only women are capable of having babies and only women are able to produce the milk necessary to keep those babies alive in their earliest moments. So if you want to survive and multiply and flourish as a society, you have to create provision for that and safety for that to happen. And you need women to step up and fulfill the role that only they can do. Likewise, men, only men, have the physical strength to create that safety for the women and the children. Only they have the strength to fight off male invaders and protect the perimeter of your society so that the women and children can have that place of safety to grow and to flourish. So you need men to step up and play their part too. If women don't do their part, or if men don't do their part, your society dies. So natural gender roles are an absolute necessity in this early period. And if you try and mess around with those gender roles and say, men, you stay at home in camp and have the babies, and women, you go out and fight the wars, that's your civilization over. It's done because men can't have babies and women would lose those wars. So reality is forcing rational belief. And if you take a misstep or if you try and go against reality in some way, the effects are immediately felt and they're devastating. You die, your civilization is conquered. There's no room for messing around. You need men to be men and you need women to be women for survival. It also goes without saying that you need heterosexual relationships because that's the only way that your numbers can multiply and you can grow as a society. So in summary, in this initial time of hardship, all life really is trying to figure out how things actually work in this world, the laws of nature, the laws of science, biology, physics, chemistry, and then adapting to work with those laws as best as you can. And the societies that understand the laws of nature the best and that adapt to them the best will then flourish the most and grow the strongest. When you uncover a new reality, a new law of science or nature, and you work with it, it's like the wind catching the sails of a ship. You just take off to new heights. Think of Britain during the Industrial Revolution as a great example of this. Now, our ancestors in the Western world in general have done this better than anyone. Our ancestors figured out how this world works better than anyone, and were able to understand and harness the laws of nature and science and work with them in the most extraordinary ways. And thus the wind caught the sails of our ship, and our civilization over hundreds and hundreds of years has absolutely flourished. Our ancestors created a good society by pursuing what was rational and real and good and true and righteous. All the most important science and technology discoveries have come from the West. The Industrial Revolution, the printing press, the car, the plane, the train, the computer, the internet, the light bulb, the flushing toilet. They had the right ideas about mathematics and economics as well, and about how to create a good capitalist society. Most importantly, they had the right ideas about God and morality. And therefore, by pursuing what was rational and good and true and righteous, they created the most powerful, comfortable, prosperous civilization that the world has ever known. They created these good times, which is great. However, as we move across to this next node, there is a downside to all of this prosperity and comfort and ease and security that we've been enjoying. And the downside is that we are now insulated and closeted from real life to some extent. Life is no longer as raw and primary and elemental as it once was. Every day is no longer this battle for survival as it once was. So in many ways, we are detached from the immediate consequences of our beliefs now. In the beginning, if you held to false beliefs, you would feel the impact of those false beliefs immediately, and it would be devastating. You would die or be conquered. Now we can hold on to luxury beliefs and mess around with false ideas, but be insulated from the outcomes of those false ideas. So for example, whereas our ancestors held to traditional gender roles because they needed to just to survive, as we saw earlier, we've now reached a place where we feel so insulated from real life that we can mess around with gender roles. It's not a life and death situation anymore. So we indulge in feminism and say that men and women are interchangeable and they're both exactly the same. And we indulge the idea of women being frontline soldiers now. And we even say maybe we don't need masculinity at all anymore. Let's try that. Let's try getting rid of men and saying that we don't need masculinity in our society anymore. And whereas heterosexuality was what caused our societies to grow with children and to multiply and flourish, maybe we mess around with sexuality now and say that homosexuality is fine, even though it's non-productive. And maybe we mess around with trans ideology as well and say that men can be women and vice versa. If our ancestors indulged in any of that nonsense, they would be dead. It just wasn't an option for them to have such anti-reality luxury beliefs. They would be dead. They would be conquered. But now we feel free to mess around with luxury beliefs. And this extends into many things. Whereas our ancestors needed to find fuel and to generate energy just to survive, for cooking and for warmth, etc. Now we think we can mess around with the energy supply and try things like net zero and deindustrialization. And even though our civilization grew prosperous through capitalism and having the right idea about economics, now we feel we can mess around with communism and maybe see where that goes. And even though faith in Jesus Christ was where the moral foundation of our society came from, and that's why we flourished, and that's why we grew strong and good and created a high trust society, now we can pretend maybe there isn't a God and mess around with subjective moralities and see where that goes, and so on and so on. In other words, our ancestors had to pursue the truth for survival, what was good and real and righteous. But now we feel at liberty to indulge in luxury beliefs. Luxury beliefs are ideas that are fashionable to have, especially amongst the elites and the academics, but that actually confer huge damage on society because they are irrational. They are not true. They are anti-reality. Now, the thing is, if just a few people on the margins of society held on to these luxury beliefs, a few crazy liberals and some naive students, we could absorb this to some extent. I mean, as long as the vast majority have their heads screwed on and they're the ones who stay in charge and make the decisions, we can absorb some of this nonsense. But when these luxury ideas become commonplace and huge numbers start adopting these irrational, anti-reality ideas, it can collapse the civilization. Just as working with reality causes civilization to flourish, working against reality causes civilization to flounder. Working with reality is like the wind hitting the sails of your ship, but working against reality causes your ship to flounder and begin to sink. And that is largely what has been happening in the West for some time. Too many people from the radical left have been born into such comfort and ease and prosperity that within this sheltered position, they feel at liberty to start messing around with luxury ideas that are anti-reality and are destructive. And unlike our ancestors, as I said, who immediately felt the consequences of their bad decisions, now they're largely insulated from experiencing the immediate consequences of those terrible ideas. So they never realize just how wrong they are and how damaging those ideas are, and they remain naive to a large extent. Now, as I was mulling this over, I came across this clip from Jacob Rees-Mogg, who is a British conservative politician. And as I watched his answer to this question, I thought, yes, Jacob, that is exactly what I'm trying to get at here.
Richard Ashton, 9490. Why is it that the more highly educated person, the more likely they are to hold left-wing views? I think it's because they are detached from the reality of the world. You take businessmen. They are dealing with customers, with employees, with shareholders. They have to deal with the reality of what happens. And therefore, most people in business are right-wing. They are conservative. Most people in academia nowadays are of the left because they don't need to. I mean, I've got lots of books around me. If you're just dealing with books and not people, you don't have to reflect or understand what they think, what their needs are. And you can also be very idealistic because you can afford to be. You've actually got to be quite rich nowadays to be a socialist. But poor people, less well-off people who want to get on in life tend and need to be conservative. Only those who are rich enough to not care about the tax they pay, not care about the way the law is applied to them or the bureaucracy they have to deal with because they employ other people to do it for them, they're the only ones who can afford to be socialists. I think that's why it is. It's the ivory tower syndrome.
The more people live insulated from real life consequences, whether by their wealth or by living in the world of academia, the more they indulge in luxury beliefs, meaning they can spout off about homosexuality and gay marriage and transgenderism and feminism and communism and atheism and Islam, whatever the current fashionable idea of the day is, but they are insulated from the real world damaging consequences of having those beliefs. So there's this huge naivety that develops in the radical left amongst the elites, amongst the rich, the academics, the metropolitan elites, as they're often called. They're spouting off about communism to their friends while themselves living with the inherited benefits of capitalism given to them by their ancestors. They don't have to live with the horrors of a communist society. They're spouting off about atheism or more recently Palestine and Islam while themselves living within the inherited benefits of a Christian morality given to them by their ancestors. They don't have to experience the consequences of living in a truly atheistic or Islamic society. They're spouting off about gay marriage while themselves being the product of a father and a mother. They don't have to experience the negative consequences of growing up without a father or a mother because they've been bought on the internet by a gay couple. They're spouting off about patriarchy being bad while themselves benefiting from all the men who built civilization over hundreds of years and who keep the infrastructure going every day, and all the men who protect the borders every day to keep them safe. They don't have to live with the consequences of their bad ideas. And because of society-wide comfort and society-wide insulation from real life, this naivety is allowed to grow and exist on quite a large scale today. Many people are now sheltered by our civilization from the outcome of bad ideas, and thus they are completely naive. And this is something that we have to put right very, very quickly. We can't allow wealthy elites and academics and naive liberals to foist their horrible anti-reality luxury ideas on us and collapse our civilization, which is what would eventually happen. You know, there are occasions when the radical left does encounter reality, and it's always a bit bemusing to watch. Sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's a bit sad, but it's always bemusing. Do you remember that radical leftist who went to Gaza to show his support for Hamas? Here he is shouting, "Free, free Palestine." But then when he actually got to Palestine, they instantly killed him. They tortured him and killed him. We all looked on at that and said, well, what did you think was going to happen? Or do you remember when a left-leaning theatre in France opened itself up to welcome illegal immigrants, and the immigrants took over the entire building for months and wouldn't leave? And I think they bankrupted the owners in the end, and the owners had to abandon it, I think. What did you think was going to happen there? Have you seen the story of the women-only island in Finland where men are not allowed, men are banned from this island? It was called Super She Island, and it was meant to be a kind of female utopia. But then they had to get men in to actually build it for them, to build the cabins and the infrastructure. And they needed men to come in periodically to fix the plumbing and electricity and so forth. What did you think was going to happen? Did you see the story of this anti-capitalist coffee shop in Toronto called the Anarchist Cafe, who told customers they could pay what they wanted or even if they wanted? They could just take their coffee and their muffins for free if they wanted. And it went bankrupt within the year. What did you think was going to happen? Did you read the stories of body positivity influencers who tried to convince the world that being fat was healthy and attractive, and they all died young because of obesity? What did you think was going to happen? I'm not aware of any Queers for Palestine actually going to Palestine yet, but we all know what would happen if any of them were silly enough to do that. And we would all say exactly the same thing. What did you think was going to happen? How could you be so naive? There is a reality to this world. There is a way that things actually are. There is a way that things actually work. There are laws of nature. And if you work against that reality, bad things will happen. Now, we have indulged luxury beliefs for far too long in the West already, and it's been harming us. We thought we could play around with silly ideas and anti-reality ideas like feminism and homosexuality, gay marriage, communism, and so forth, and we thought that nothing bad would happen. But it has. It has damaged us. And the quicker we start pursuing what is rational and real and good and true and righteous again, the quicker we will get back on that upward curve. I think we're already beginning to feel the hard times of these luxury beliefs, and it's already causing many to reset. I mean, reports of Christianity growing are on the rise, thankfully. Many people feel increasingly confident about speaking the truth to feminism again, and homosexuality and transgenderism and opposing Islam. And that's all very good. We want more of that. The quicker we all do that, the quicker we all come back to this point again, the quicker we will get back on that upward curve. So let's do it. Let's get back to reality, rationale, what's good, what's true, what's real, what is righteous. And let's get back on that upward curve again as a civilization.